Welcome to Loup TV. I'm Gene along with Doug. This is Monday, January 17th. Three topics today. Crypto.com had some sort of unauthorized activity. Second is Apple tangling with Dutch regulators. And lastly, the world of price increases, Netflix and Peloton, how to read it in an inflationary environment. We're going to jump to the A topic, something that you spend a lot of time on, crypto, NFTs. We're big believers and investors in Coinbase. Here's Crypto.com with some, would be from a headline, is some concerning activity. What is, just at the highest level, what happened?
Yeah, anytime you hear unauthorized activity in crypto, it means that money was stolen. You can kind of transcode that language pretty easily. And what it sounds like,
even though, just by the way, you have to, it's worth noting that because from the company's Twitter account, they did say all funds are secure, which we'll talk about in a minute, but keep rolling.
That's right. And, I think it just highlights the importance of security in the crypto world. There's been, and we've talked about this before here, this sort of debate between centralized exchanges. Do they create this sort of single point of attack or large vector for attack of hackers versus decentralized exchanges, which obviously more sophisticated users for the most part use decentralized exchanges. But this is just kind of the latest example of, a hack in crypto where funds were stolen, and it's not the last one we're going to hear about.
So when we think about crypto's business, Crypto.com's business, it's basically an exchange very similar to Coinbase. And as you said, the debate lies between centralized or decentralized. And kind of one of the ironies of both of those exchanges is that we have this centralized authority around a decentralized platform. Isn't exchanging or trading on both of these platforms in some ways, isn't it disrespectful to the whole concept of the blockchain and crypto?
A purist might say that. I'm not one that sort of shares that belief. I think there are use cases where centralized protocols or centralized products make a lot of sense. And I think there are use cases where decentralized protocols make a lot of sense too. If you really are well versed in crypto, if you understand what you're doing, if you understand the difference between hot storage and cold storage, for example, if those words are foreign to you, then you should definitely be using centralized exchanges. But if you understand crypto to a deeper level, then I think using these decentralized protocols, storing your assets in a safe way where you are really the sole point of custody of the assets, I think that can work very well for the sophisticated user. The problem is when we talk about crypto and getting hundreds of millions, potentially billions of people over time using these digital assets, most people just aren't that sophisticated when it comes to technology. And having a centralized access point, I think in that case, does make sense. So when you think about having hundreds of millions or even billions of users on crypto, the reality is most people just aren't that sophisticated in their understanding of technology. They don't understand decentralized exchanges. They don't want to understand it. They don't care. And so I think in that sense, centralized exchanges, centralized access points make a lot of sense for those users. They simplify the process for people to get on en masse. And being centralized in a way is really a feature, not a bug, because when you have that sort of central authority, they take responsibility when something goes wrong.
I think that's a huge deal. I mean, the opposite, even if you are a purist and you're doing this all yourselves and you get hacked, you're done. I mean, there's no recourse.
That's right. And you said in the tweet, all funds were secured. That was kind of the second piece of it. And to decrypt that language, I think that means that Crypto.com is going to make anybody who lost money whole and make sure that no one, comes out of this with a financial loss other than Crypto.com. And I think that's really important too. It's a fundamental business choice on their end, because if they didn't do that, if they sort of got this quick reputation of the exchange that doesn't take care of their customers, then I think their business is over. That people would leave. They'd go to Coinbase, they'd go to FTX, they'd go to whatever other exchange because they would feel like they couldn't trust Crypto.com with their assets.
And you'd think that crypto would know, Coinbase would know that if they have a big hack and they weren't able to make everyone whole, that their business is over, which to me says they probably do have some form of insurance, as though it's hard to get. They probably pay a ton for it. But I mean, this would be, talk about existential risk to a business if I would guess there's some sort of recourse or some sort of backstop they have. Is that correct?
I have heard of certain types of insurance related to crypto assets. It's a pretty emerging and nascent field, as you could probably imagine. My guess is there may be some low-level insurance policies. I do think a lot of this is probably, at the end of the day, though, self-insurance by
Yeah,
these companies. And these businesses are highly profitable. I think that's the other thing that we should understand here. Coinbase, they have free cash flow margins this year probably will end around 45 or 50%. So, I mean, tremendously profitable. Normally, financial exchanges are tremendously profitable. You look at the NASDAQ, you look at the ICE, they're great businesses. And so they do have the cash to sort of
got it.
self-insure in that
And we're
sense.
talking. Who knows how many people were hacked? My guess is it's a relatively small number here,
Yeah,
but
it's probably millions of dollars. I mean, there's no question about that. Whether it's probably not hundreds of millions, I would doubt that, but certainly in the millions.
okay. Let's move on to the Netherlands and step aside from the difference between the Netherlands, the Dutch, and how Holland fits into all this, and just leave it with the Dutch courts and Apple are tangling once again here. This is kind of a little bit of a rift on what we talked about last week with what's happening in South Korea. Each country kind of has their own kind of regulatory environment and are taking different swings, I think, at big tech in general. In this case, Match.com was kind of one of the central players in it, and effectively is starting later this month. The Dutch regulators are going to require that Apple, for dating apps, be open to third-party payment options. And so feels like probably a sense of deja vu. And I think that this is a relatively small market in the grand scheme of things. Apple obviously is fighting hard. And of course, Epic has to weigh in. Sweeney needs to weigh in whenever he sees an opportunity to probably say something negative about Apple. How do you kind of see this lining up from, what's the takeaway?
I'll stick with what I said when we talked about South Korea the other week, which is I still think we're just in the early innings of these individual jurisdictions sort of chipping away at the App Store. I just think fees are going to come down, whether anybody likes it or not. Whether we want to talk about freedom to charge what you want, we can talk all about those things. It doesn't matter is the bottom line. What matters is the courts are starting to say that we think you should open up the App Store in different ways, in different jurisdictions. But I'll stick with what I said there. And I will also stick with the idea that I think it comes back to the customer. I mean, Apple always talks about trying to make the greatest products and treating its customers right. I still don't see, how excluding just the option of other payment mechanisms, not saying that Apple has to remove their tools, but offering third party, as an option just doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal. It certainly is going to lower their take rate. That's why they don't want to do it. We all know that. But if they really care about what's best for the customer, I think over time, that's just the direction we're going to go.
Yeah, at the risk of rehashing the argument from last week, my sense is that customers are better because of the payment system. I think that it does allow transparency and security that you don't necessarily get. I think that in the case of these dating apps, I think Match needs to relaunch their own dating app based in the region, which I suspect is not better for. I wouldn't say that's better for the consumer, but I do believe that the payment options are better. And ultimately, from my perspective,
I'm going to interject though. I can't. Every time we talk about this, that sticks with me because if PayPal, let's say, brought a payment mechanism on, or someone like Shopify, Stripe powered a back end, that's just as trustworthy as Apple. There are parties out there that could offer very trustworthy payment mechanisms. I don't think Apple's the only one who can do it. That's my objection to that.
Well, I mean, we'll see. Time will tell. We were just talking about crypto.com getting hacked too, and I guess time will tell. That's true. Those are strong brands. They stand behind their payment systems. I think when I think about the broader payment opportunity, I don't think it's just about PayPal and Stripe. I think that there are just a whole a spectrum of different payment options out there that would not be as secure. And so, if it was limited to simply PayPal, I would think that would be, from a consumer standpoint, would be pretty much a wash. I do. My point is that it's not about what the regulators ultimately think. I think it's the free hand of the market ultimately is going to determine this, and the free hand of the market is going to determine consumers will vote by their engagement, their purchasing activity, and if consumers don't feel like these other payment options, don't feel any sort of difference in them, and are okay to go through whatever other steps they need to go through, then the conversion will be great, and Apple's going to be forced to lower their pricing. They will be to the point where you see that supply-demand kind of equilibrium, that clearing price in terms of what the take rate is. There is a clearing price. I don't know if it's at 30. In some cases, it's going to be 30. I agree with you that over time that the take rates are going to decline. I think it's probably a 5-year piece, and I think we'll continue to talk about these topics. We are generally on the same page. I just think that my point is it's up to the free hand of the market, and the developers are keeping a close eye on what conversion is as they add these different payment systems. And we're going to learn a lot from this, and we'll certainly hear from a lot more
I
countries
want to
around
add
it.
a philosophical thought too, which is, well, number one, though, for the market to choose, they have to have choices. So we can leave it there too. Apple does have to open up to let the market choose. And the courts are going to decide that ultimately. That's kind of all that we're talking about. The philosophical thing, though, I think is so interesting that this topic seems to bring up, and Tesla, maybe even more so, is you get these sort of religious ideas in markets where people like have to be all in that they love something or they're totally against it. And it's something that the financial, I think, media sometimes does. And I think the financial community on Twitter also does, where they say there's no middle ground. To me, there's a clear middle ground about right and wrong here with Apple. I love Apple. Every product I have an iPad, I have an iPhone, I've got 3 Macs, I think. I don't have any Windows products. I used an Android notebook this weekend and it was awful. I stopped using it after 15 minutes because the product just doesn't work. So I love Apple. But I also feel I'm rational enough to say, I think Apple's wrong here. I think they're in the wrong. I understand why they're doing it because they're protecting a really valuable business, but I actually think they're in the wrong. And to me, I always love when we have these religious sides with, Tesla, the haters and the lovers, where there's really no rationality in between. The contrarian view, when you get that, is actually to be the rational voice in the middle. And for me, it's like, I love Apple as a business. I love it as a stock. Even if they change their take rates here, that may be a headwind to the stock. I don't think it changes much to the story long term.
Yeah.
But I think that something's going to give. And I just think that they're in the wrong here, despite how I feel about the company.
And I guess maybe reading between the lines there, if I'm the irrational supporter here of Apple, I would suggest
I think you are.
Yeah, I would say that I believe that the take rates are going to go down. So I think that the free hand of the market will determine that, but I do think take rates are going down. I do think verticalization is an advantage. I think it's an advantage for Tesla. I think it's an advantage for Apple. And I think how the payment systems integrate with the software and services, I think there is an inherent security advantage to that. And so you could argue that is a distorted view. Maybe it's I've given into some of the propaganda that has been given to me. But when you talk about that experience on the Android device, and I think about other experiences with EVs relative to Tesla, I think verticalization does matter. I think it's a competitive advantage. Again, we're in the same place, is that the free hand of the market or the governments will issue in slightly lower take rates. My guess is, by the way, we're at 30 and 15 right now for Apple. I suspect that it's going to probably be something like 25 and 15 in 5 years from now. I don't suspect it's going to be 15 and 15. So, but I'll give you the final word on it.
I'll take the under, yeah. And I would just say this. I understand the security argument. I think that's the argument Apple makes. And the flaw with it to me is quite simple, which is we're not talking about when you go and make a purchase on your Safari browser and you buy anything from any e-commerce store you ever buy from, when are we talking about security there? That payment structure is no different than doing it on a native app. And I'll leave it there. If you're really worried about, don't ever buy anything on your Safari app then, if you're really worried about security and payments.
Well, there's the payments piece, but there's also the security around payments. There's also the security around the software too, which you can use. The payments could be
goes to the app store.
We should do a whole Loup TV just in kind of the pros and cons, and To or not to drink Kool-Aid could perhaps be the title. That'd be a fun one. Let's
The red
wrap
pill
with
in the Matrix. I'm all
yeah, I
about
added
that.
in. Be a slow day. We'll do that one. It's not a slow day today, though. Netflix. This is our final topic around price increases, but with a twist here. And the price increase, Netflix raised their prices. This is the first time that they've done it in about 13 months. They do it about every 12 to 15 months. They raised it by 15% this time, kind of on average. The last time was late in 2020 when they raised it by about 10%. And that coincides with Peloton raising their prices effectively on the deliveries. They used to give that away for free. Over this weekend, they said they're going to charge $250 for like delivery on a bike, $350 for the tread, and I think they're going to raise price on the bikes in Europe. This is a reversal from what they had done in the fall, when they had lowered the price to increase the market. I think there are two things going on, but the first thing that strikes me when I see these price increases, when I see Netflix raising prices, this dynamic, that this is not your typical price increase environment where it's a sign that demand is great. I think it is different in the sense that expenses are greater too. And when you think about the benefit that Netflix gets with this raised pricing, undoubtedly their production costs are going up a lot too. But when you think about Peloton, there's also probably even more. You're talking about hard goods here. You're talking about whatever those bikes are made out of, steel, aluminum, carbon, who knows, whatever it is, that component's probably up and to the right. So my first takeaway from this is you cannot read these as your typical let's go rock and roll, business is great, price increase. It may actually say something very different about the reality of what they're going through. And I think an indication also that everyone's going to have to be raising their prices. And I think I have to get back on my soapbox here. The Fed's got to take things under control in the pricing environment. What was your take?
I would say something similar. I think this is anytime people talk about investing in inflationary environments, you always want to talk about having companies in your portfolio that have pricing power. I think in the case of Netflix, costs probably are going up, but I think that their price raise, to me, as you said, they raise prices fairly frequently with a
Pretty
decent
consistent.
regular cadence. Yeah, and it's because they have pricing power. It's because they know the elasticity of demand for their product, and they know that adding a dollar to the subscription every once in a while just isn't going to force customers to go away. And it's so hard to get rid of your Netflix subscription, and they just keep adding more and more and more content to the offering. It doesn't mean that we think it's a great stock. It's not something that we own, but I think it is a demonstration of kind of the canonical example of pricing power. For Peloton,
one more on Netflix is I agree with that, is that this is much more a positive on the price elasticity than it is some sort of negative commentary about their expense environment. But you're saying about Peloton?
I read it, yeah, probably in line with what you said as well, and with a very specific take, which is, they've kind of struggled, I think, with pricing, and what they're doing now is effectively a price increase. Really, there's maybe a semantic difference they would offer, which is, they're charging for delivery fees now, and in some countries, I think they are raising the price of the bike. But exactly, I mean, the price is going up to the customer. And I think what's kind of unique for them is they just lowered prices middle of last year
to try to end of September.
Boost demand. That's right. And they reversed that now.
By the way, that fell flat on its face too. They lowered price and no one showed up.
That's right. And I think that this move is probably a response to that and sort of an embrace to that. I think the debate around Peloton has always been, how big is the market really for this sort of luxury stay-at-home fitness product? Bulls would want to believe that there's this huge market of people, if you get the price low enough, that a lot of people would have these bikes in their house. And to your point, I think after they lowered the price, they didn't see a demand spike. What this price increase tells me is I actually think they're embracing the reality that maybe the market is just the upper end luxury customer, and that customer is relatively price insensitive. So the market may be smaller, but they probably can charge that wealthy higher end customer more than they have been, and maybe they'll just lean into that strategy a little bit more here.
Yeah, it's a pretty finite market too in terms of people who are willing to pay that. At the peak of the pandemic, I think they were doing about 350,000 new connected devices, basically bikes that they sold to new customers in a quarter before the pandemic. It was like 150,000. I think for the December quarter, the street's looking for it basically to be flat year over year. But if they pulled enough demand forward, that number could be potentially dramatically lower. And I think that it does beg also a question about. You also have a base of users that are fanatical about it. People who get Pelotons are obnoxiously supportive of the product. And I think the other insight here is people don't like to work out. It's a hassle. It's also expensive. But $480 a year. But it still surprises me. You got 50 million gym memberships in the U.S. and we're talking about 2 million Peloton memberships at about the same cost. It still feels like it's a market that they can grow into, but I think that just reading between the lines here, it feels like it's more of a headwind that they're going up against than any sort of tailwind. Good news, one of the best parts about our job is we find out, in this case, we're going to find out more in the earnings cycle for both of these with Netflix in the next couple weeks, along with Peloton. I'm going to wrap there, Doug. On behalf of Doug, Gene, and Loup TV, bye for now.